Hi, welcome back to Lead Wisely by WonderTour. We are wrapping up our series on villains and the leadership lessons we can learn from them and the leadership lessons we can learn about how to not become them. This is our second episode on the Amazon Prime series, The Rings of Power, and we're talking, of course, about Sauron, the opponent in the Lord of the Rings mythology. In his personas in the first season as Halbrand the human, and his second season as Annatar, the elven emissary. And last episode, we talked a little bit about his leadership style, and we saw several people getting led astray by his powerful influence. And so today we're going to start off with a tough question about leadership. How do we avoid being led astray by the Saurons of the world? Assuming you could potentially fall into the trap of being a Celebrimbor or a Galadriel, how do you not fall into that trap, Drew?
Brian, you're telling me I'm capable of falling prey to the deceiver, Sauron? Yeah,
I don't know about
I
you.
think
I am
I've
100%.
yeah,
I'm right there. I'm right on the edge.
I think I've done that before a few times. Yeah, so I think first off we got to have a short conversation about Sauron and kind of his failure modes in order to be able to discuss this, because
Okay.
what is it in Sauron's character that has him doing this, that has him leading people astray? Because that's the answer. And I think Galadriel comes to a little bit of an answer about this in the second season. But first off, Sauron, what does he want? It's not very obvious, I think, based on everything we've seen so far, all the Lord of the Rings lore, that what he wants is to become a god. He is a kind of a minor god that wants he wants to be Morgoth, but he wants to be greater than Morgoth. And Morgoth's whole thing is that Iluvatar, the creator god, is a god of light, basically, that wants to bring light to this whole world. And Morgoth is hiding in darkness, and he's leveraging darkness, and he's doing it to undermine the creator god because he wants to be on that level. And I think that's what we see with Sauron. So when we think about that, that's his prime goal. He wants to undermine the true reality of things and instate his own reality instead. And so that's what we see his superpower is, right? He has this ability to form illusions in season 2. He can
Mm-hmm.
trick people and deceive them into seeing things the way they want to see them and the way he wants them to see things instead of the way the world actually is. So we see Celebrimbor get tricked by not checking his reality. He's stuck up in this tower and he's trapped up there for days, weeks. I don't know how long he's up there, but it's a long time. And he's not leaving. He's just become so fixated on something that he can't tell what's happening outside of him. So when you talk about how do we avoid becoming blind, I mean, it has a lot to do with understanding actual reality. Like, it's one thing to sit and talk about, oh, the world should be better and, somebody should implement these policies. It should be this way and not that way. It's another thing entirely to actually go see the impact of those things. Go
Mm-hmm.
understand how people are experiencing the world who are going through the challenges that we're talking about. That is, I think, what Galadriel starts to learn. And obviously, it's partly this elven ring that she's wearing that helps her to pierce through Sauron's deceptions that he had previously been using as Halbrand to stop her. But once she realizes, I think, going back to what you said when you asked me the question, Brian, the starting point is the realization that we're all Celebrimbor, that we all are Galadriel, and that we are susceptible. Challenges his deceptions. She's constantly second guessing herself and saying, wait a minute, am I falling for it again? Is this
Mm-hmm.
actually a worthy mission? Or am I once again in it for myself, trying to vindicate my mission, trying to conquer the orcs because they killed my brother Finarfin?
Okay, so I think that I really like something you said in there that as a lesson, right? Galadriel doesn't she doesn't avoid falling into the trap because she's really smart or because she has some really good skill. She doesn't avoid falling into the trap because somebody pointed it out to her. She avoids falling into the trap because she remembers the last time she fell into the trap. She learns from experience. She internalizes like, oh, I am vulnerable to this. I saw the world the way I wanted it to be rather than the way it was. And that led me into a really bad place. And so I'm going to try really hard not to do that again. And I think that's the thing, right? Is this the recognizing, like we said, that you could be Galadriel, that you could be Celebrimbor, that you could be so focused on your own goals and your own little motivations that you sort of forget to pick your head up and look around. Remembering to recognize that is the thing that we see people failing at, but also that is available to all of us at any time.
Oh, and I want to take it one step further because what you just said there is brilliant, Brian. And she tells us at the end in episode 8 of season 2 what she learned. And it's like the most quotable thing in the whole episode. You know, we don't overcome the darkness by strength. The darkness is overcome by the light. That's what she recognizes. The whole time she's trying to fight hard to overcome this darkness, and she realizes the futility of it, that all of her effort that she's putting in actually resulted in the darkness gaining ground. And we have it, they say it multiple times in the last episode, I think, but you have this realization that to defeat the darkness, the answer is to stay close to the light. And it's WonderTour, so we're not too prescriptive on worldview on here, but we are going to tell you what the Lord of the Rings is saying. And the Lord of the Rings is saying to defeat the darkness, the answer is to stay close to the light, because I am an unreliable human in the story. How do I stay close to the light of Valar? Because that is what keeps me sane. That is what keeps me from falling to the darkness.
All right, let's hit the intro, and then we'll come back and talk more about what staying close to the light looks like. Hi, I'm Brian Nutwell.
And I'm Drew Perot.
And we are on a journey to lead wisely, to become better leaders by touring fantastic worlds and inspiring lore by going on a WonderTour.
We connect leadership concepts to story context because it sticks to our brains better. You can find out more at WonderTourPodcast.com or on YouTube by looking up Lead Wisely, all one word.
And this is one of our flavors of, leaning into the light, right? Is that look at the lessons, look at the failure modes, look at the stories, tell yourself, we're always telling ourselves stories. That's one of the reasons that WonderTour works for me, to help me think about how to navigate my life, how to think about how to navigate leadership challenges, is because I frame things in terms of stories. Like it's easy to imagine myself as a character. It's easy to imagine myself as in some crazy exaggerated version of my reality. Fortunately, I've never been in Mordor when the mountain blows up and I've had to flee from the orcs. Like my life experiences has not been that dramatic, right? But I have absolutely been in the Galadriel frame of mind where I desperately needed an ally and where nobody was helping me solve the problem that I wanted to solve, and I was a little bit vulnerable to poor advice, right? Or to seeing people from the way that I wanted them to be. I've super definitely been Celebrimbor, where I was so excited about making some technology thing that I wasn't super focused on the context or the impact or the ways that it could possibly go wrong. Right. I recognize that in myself. So one version of leaning into the light is is trying to see reality, trying to see what's going on around you. This is a lesson in a lot of, in a lot of mythologies and a lot of spiritual practices, right? Is that kind of casting off the illusions and trying to just see through what you want to see in the world to what's actually happening in the world.
It's very effective.
It's very effective. It's
when
really hard.
We can pull it off. Yeah, exactly.
It's really hard. It's really hard, right? We want to tell ourselves the story. The failure mode of I really like stories is that I'm always crafting things into the story that I want to see, right? And so letting go of that a little bit and like, oh yeah, I was wrong that other time. I might be wrong this time. Let me just question it a little bit. Let me take a step back. Let me look at it from a different angle. Let me ask for a second opinion. Let me listen to people that are trying to give me advice. Like we see all those examples too, where Galadriel could have been maybe a little more focused on the light, right? She was right about the risks. She's right about the danger, but she may not have been right about the correct way to solve it was, by battering it with swords.
Yeah, and who do we see who probably is the best example of sticking close to the light? Our Obi-Wan character in the entire Lord of the Rings series, Elrond.
Right.
He is consistently questioning what is reality, making sure that he's staying as close to the light of the Valar as possible. He's ever vigilant for the return of evil. He is not going to even let his relationship with others, with Galadriel or Gil-galad or anybody, get in the way of the overall mission. He just continuously centers himself. And that doesn't mean he's always right, because he is wrong in a way about the rings. He's right to be skeptical, but he ends up realizing the error of his ways when he sees the true reality, right? He sees that the elves are in a dire spot and the rings actually were a gift from the Valar to protect them in this moment. That these rings are not corrupted and they can be leveraged. And that's the founding of Rivendell that we see at the end of episode 8, which is super, super cool. And obviously, also, he saves Galadriel with that wisdom.
Right. Well, so yeah, that's a good way. We hadn't said this out loud, I think, when we talked in the pre-show, but the Elrond is the counterexample of leadership styles to Sauron, not because he's so different. He actually is really similar in that he makes really genuine connections with his friends, with Durin, with Galadriel. You know, with Celebrimbor. Like, he makes genuine connections with people. He's very sensitive to supporting them in their goals. Like, those things he actually has in common with Sauron. The thing that's different is that he doesn't encourage them to lean into their worst impulses. And he's willing to change his opinions. He's willing to change his goals on the medium level to achieve the kind of higher level flourishing for all. Where Sauron is never going to abandon, like, oh, you're right, Galadriel, we should wipe out the orcs. Like, he's never going to abandon his long term goals in favor of, like, oh, I was mistaken, Galadriel, you've got a good point. Elrond's willing to learn from his mistakes. He's willing to learn from new information. He's willing to adapt his behaviors, but he still has this encouraging flourishing in his friends and more broadly in the world is his sort of unswerving dedication. And so, yeah, the way it's presented in this series, he's very much the counter example of leadership to Sauron, where the reason that Sauron is effective is when he's like Elrond, and the reason that we don't want to be Sauron is when he's not like Elrond.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to nerd out a little bit about this because Tolkien makes this so complex, and it's why it's one of the great universes ever created. But there's not one chosen one. This isn't as simple as Star Wars. Star Wars was meant to be simple. This is
Right.
not meant to be simple. This is meant to be this long running universe of many stories that through repetition and variation teach us through myths, basically, truths about the universe. And it's brilliant in that way. And so just for those who are tuning into the Rings of Power but aren't super huge Lord of the Rings nerds and can nerd out a little bit, I mean, Elrond is kind of like this royal bloodline of people in this universe. Like, he is a child of Elwing, Elwing is a child of Beren and Luthien, which is one of the great stories in the Silmarillion. But either way, he's kind of like a mix of high elf bloodline with the high man bloodline with the Maya, which is like what Sauron is, a lower god bloodline as well. And so with Luthien, so he's kind of this like blending of the best of all of the different races in this world. And so it makes sense that Elrond kind of carries some of the wisdom of each race. And he is in a way, he is very much the fulfillment of the intent of Iluvatar's wisdom in the world. He acts like Iluvatar's point in creating these beings is that they would act wisely. Like we talk about on Lead Wisely, he wants them to lead wisely in creating this world. And Elrond is kind of the embodiment of that. And it's cool that you recognize that he's the inverse of Sauron in that way. Sauron has the skills that were given to him also when he was created by Iluvatar, but he has allowed them to be twisted.
Right. That's we talk a lot about the heroic characters, the magnanimous leaders in a lot of the stories that we like. A lot of these movies we watch we call them the interlopers, the people that cross between worlds, that can carry messages between worlds, that can interpret the world in different viewpoints and help people reframe themselves. And Elrond is very much that, right? He's the one that we see as the emissary to the dwarves, and he's not just like trying to convince them to do something for his own reasons. He's like genuinely friends with Durin and genuinely wants the best for his friend, right? And he's trying to find the synergy, as in the business term, right? Like, he's trying to find the thing that will benefit both. But he's very much the interloper character. He's always carrying messages between people. He's always the diplomat. He's always like trying to figure out how to negotiate things. And so that that alternate view of leading with influence is displayed really well with Elrond, where Sauron's view of leading with influence is for his own purposes, encouraging the worst behaviors, the worst attributes of others. And Elrond is leading with influence, encouraging the best attributes of others, but also trying to lean into, their future benefits, to creating a better future that is more inclusive. I think you're right. This is a story this is not a story about simplicity. This is a story about complexity. It's a story about not just good versus evil, and not that order is necessarily correct or disorder is necessarily evil, but that there's the tension between the two of those, and navigating those with sympathy is the magnanimous leader that we see. And we see a lot of the other leaders struggling with this. The Queen of the Númenóreans is pretty skillful. She's very sympathetic. She's got people's best interests at heart. The King of the Elves, on and off, right? He's very this is the way we do things around here, right? And so he's not terribly sympathetic to the people around him, right? It takes a lot for him to get off a top dead center. So, but Elrond is, even when he's self-doubting, is walking that line very skillfully.
Yeah, he's the best of the people that we come across, and he would be the magnanimous leader. I suspect, Brian, we're going to need to do a whole nother episode on Elrond, or series of episodes on Elrond, now that we've had this conversation.
Yes, I think season 3, he's obviously breaking out, so we'll come back to that one. So, but let's talk a little bit about, let's get to the mountaintop here. So now that we've got this challenge of, there are magnanimous leaders in the world, we hope, who have our best interests at heart. There are leaders who behave very similarly, who work through influence, who play on our desires, who paint beautiful pictures of the future, who may not have our best interests at heart. How do we tell the difference? How do we not fall into the trap that Celebrimbor falls into of becoming increasingly isolated and oblivious?
Yeah, and they try to tell that story a little bit, and that's our mountaintop moment, is when Celebrimbor breaks out of this shadow realm, this illusion that Sauron has him in at the top of the tower. We get this pattern. They really did a good job with the storytelling, and even the cinematography is pretty good in this show. We didn't even get to that part, Brian, yet, but truly one of the best TV show seasons we've seen in years.
Yes.
But you get this patterning of the mouse, and you as the audience are trying to figure out, like, okay, why did they keep showing us Celebrimbor looking at this little mouse? And then he ends up having the moment where Sauron comes up to the top of the tower and, of course, asking him about the 9 rings for men again. And he's like, just look at it. Just look at the mouse. And he's kind of playing into this character that Sauron is building him into. He's trying to turn him into this crazy person, especially from the perspective of all of the constituents of his city. And he's like, no, there's a pattern to it. There's a pattern to it. He's like, there's something wrong with this reality. It's just repeating itself. And the candles haven't burned down. The way, and then he's able to finally tear back the veil, and he sees the burning and the destruction outside, and it destroys him. And Brian, I've been there before as a Celebrimbor, where I was just leaving the illusion up, like, everything's fine. My relationships are fine. My decisions are fine. Like, I'm not harming anybody else. I'm just following after my own goal. And then it all comes crashing down at a certain point where you realize, oh no, if I just take off the rose-colored glasses, the city is burning around me, and it is truly my fault. I was the city's protector, or at least I'm the person who has the ability to take action in the situation.
Yes. No, I didn't actually think of this until just now, right? I love how this is almost exactly the same lesson as in the Matrix, right? In the Matrix movie, the glitch in the Matrix is the cat that does the same thing 2 or 3 times, like, oh, deja vu. And the idea that the illusion can't be perfect, right? If you're telling yourself lies about the world, if you're not paying attention to the clues the world's telling you, there will be clues. There will be things like, oh, that doesn't make sense with what I'm thinking is going on. And if you tug on those threads, in this case, it's like, oh, well, that's, the illusion isn't perfect. Like, it looks like the world that I thought I was living in. But once I start digging into it, like, oh man, there's all this crap. Like, there's all this stuff that is not the way that I thought, that I didn't really want to look at it, so I was assuming that it was fine. So I love that it's kind of the same mechanism, like, is the lesson is almost like look for the glitch in the matrix, right? If you're starting to get uncomfortable, look for the things that are not consistent with your assumptions, right? Like everything is fine, we're doing a really great job, but it's really weird that we're getting these customer complaints, very consistently, or it's really weird that the money's not piling up in this place the way I thought it would be, or it's really weird that this person is always just not behaving the way that I expected. Like, lean into that. Like, maybe you should understand the parts, the facts that are around you that are not lining up with your assumptions are the ones that are going to teach you something.
Yeah, I want to pull in one of my favorite quotes of all time from the philosopher Boethius here. Imprudence may deceive itself, but it cannot alter the true reality of things. And it
Ah, love
just
it.
nails it there, right? So what is that quote saying? That quote saying, what you, from your perspective, believe to be true or not true cannot actually alter the true reality of things. So be
Right.
very careful of holding false beliefs. And this is the whole point of the deceiver. Sauron is he gives these half truths to Galadriel, to Celebrimbor, so that they can feel good about themselves and the actions that they're taking.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is they're just slightly off. Just slightly. Like the things that they're doing, the creation of the rings seems like a noble thing to do. It doesn't seem like a bad idea. Even the elven rings are good. He creates
Right.
truly great rings that rival Feanor's Silmarils, which was his goal. And the Silmarils were pleasing to the Valar and to Iluvatar, so it was a good thing that they created them, right?
Right.
Problem is he just twists it just a little bit and he's like, no, you don't stop there. Like
Right.
you gotta make more rings. You've already proven yourself that you can make these. Why you can make more?
Well, I love what you said about 6 times in that phrase was you, right? One of our classic Wonder Tour lessons is the "It's not about you" line from Doctor Strange. And Sauron is, it's all about you. It's about your skill. It's about your vision. It's about your heroism. It's about your version of reality, right? So I think that's kind of our second lesson, right? The look for the glitch in the matrix, look for the fact that doesn't align with your worldview, and maybe tug on that thread and see if it illuminates something, cast some light, as you were saying, on a thing that you didn't see before. But also beware of the "it's all about you" leader. Beware of the "you're special and you get to break the rules and you should do things for your own motivations and for your own reasons." The leader that is telling you that, or the voice inside that is telling you that, "I've got that one. I'm special. I should be able to do this because I'm smarter than everybody," right? Like, that's also a real risk. If you get into the "it's all about you" mode, then you are more vulnerable to the illusions. You're more vulnerable to not seeing the harms, not seeing the consequences, not seeing over the hill.
Yeah, man. It is so tough. I mean, this is a really tough mountaintop because when you're in that moment with the illusion up, that's the most comfortable way to live. Especially considering like there's definitely a part of Celebrimbor that knows that an illusion is up. He admits as much. He's like, I knew it was there, but I didn't want to believe it. And
Right.
this is when relationships deteriorate. Like you were saying, Brian, this is when businesses fall apart. It's because you knew something was up, but you never took the time to go check out the true reality of what was going on. You never pulled back the veil. You just left up the rose-colored glasses thinking this is good. And then the part that you added in there about, using the word I, there's nothing that you can do quicker in a conversation to me to tell me that you're not necessarily a mature leader than use the word I 90% of the time when you're talking about your organization or your team. That
Right.
I mean, we all are perpetually getting better at it. I say I sometimes too when I'm talking about things that I've done. And also that tells me that we're still internalizing the lesson. It's not about you.
Right. Right. And I think that it's just, we see genuine skill, we see genuine accomplishment, we see genuine, intention and effort in all of the characters, possibly excepting Sauron in this series, right? Like, we talk a lot about, for creative people, trying to get into the flow state, right? If you're writing code, or if you're an artist, or you're making a beautiful PowerPoint deck or whatever, like the idea that you would get super into a task and try to be really good at it and sort of shut out the world for long enough to really just be hyper productive. That's not a bad thing. The bad thing is never stepping back and zooming out and like, okay, great, am I working on the right thing? do I understand the context of what I'm doing? And I think that's all we're saying. So I don't know if we have some examples of how that can go poorly, but I feel like this, again, this is a series about complexity. This is a series about tension between order and disorder. Like, we're not saying that there's like one pattern of behavior. The challenge here is just trying to get some facts, trying to let go of your illusions and make sure that you're tethered to the ground truth.
Yeah. So let's get to our practical application. And this is going to seem maybe simple, but that's kind of the point. Some of the simplest explanations are the most helpful because they're the most transferable across contexts. But if we just look at the Enron example of what happened, where we had an organization that had found an exploit that allowed them to be hyper successful in the short term,
Right.
and then kind of just put up the veil, right? Put on the rose colored glasses. Once you have those rose colored glasses on, in the Enron story, right, they find the accounting loophole. They're able to pull forward their profits and look like they're a extremely successful business, the most successful business. And so that gets everybody behind them, and they're kind of able to leverage that to continue to get future profits and pull them forward. And the problem is that, of course, it's short sighted, and it allows you to live in the lap of luxury in the present and have this, be a celebrity and how are you doing this type thing, which plays exactly at what Sauron wants us to do, right? He wants you to
Right.
make it about you and make it about your ability to be more successful, more skilled, whatever, rather than learning the lesson we learned in the first episode, which is, yeah, the way that we defeat darkness is not by being stronger. So if anybody's trying to tell us that oh, you just got to be stronger, that's how we're going to save humanity, we just got to keep getting stronger, that strength does not defeat darkness, Lord of the Rings teaches us. So how do we overcome Sauron in this moment? Because Sauron wants us to go, this is kind of maybe our last lesson here. Sauron wants us to go after those short-term gains while
Right.
he is seeking after the long-term gain.
Right. And I think I love the way that you had said that, right? Sauron's always playing the long game. He's trying to get everyone else to play a short game, right? And he's very skillful at getting them aligned on goals that they sincerely want in the short term, but then sort of distracting them from the longer term goals. And so I think that's our challenge, is to always be checking in with those, be checking in with, are the short term things we're doing moving us in the right direction? Are we thinking deeply about what the right direction actually is? Right. And you can be successful with both of those approaches, right? You need to spend most of your time thinking about short term stuff. But if you're only focused on the short term benefit, or if you are so excited about the short term benefit that you're not thinking clearly, I think the other example we talked about was like crypto scams, right? Like there was this whole bubble of like random crypto coins that everybody was going to invest in that were going to go 100x value in 3 months, and you were going to be a millionaire and everybody else was going to be poor, and it was just because you were so smart, right? There were a small number of people that got very, very wealthy out of that, and they were mostly people that were manipulating the system because they had a longer term view. And there were a whole lot of people that lost a medium amount of money in those things because they bought into a system that they didn't understand, only because they were focused on short term gains, with the idea that you could get that with as little effort and skill as possible.
Yeah, that's always the trick, right? Is you can
Yeah,
do this and you can do it faster. And we see that with the
right,
rings. We see him trying to get Celebrimbor, like, no, you need to make them faster. And like, oh, it's okay
right.
for
Yeah,
the rings of men to be, they don't have to be as good as the rings for elves.
yeah. Just get them done, get it done. Yeah, yeah. You're right. That's true. That's another technique, is the pressure. Like, oh, get it done, get it. It's so urgent. Then you don't think to zoom out, right? But that sense that you can lose track of the big picture, that sense that you can sort of just not think very deeply about consequences, right? Elrond doesn't lose track of the big picture. The counterexample we see in this series is that Elrond stays tethered to the greatest flourishing, stays tethered to the good for the greatest number of people, stays tethered to his relationships with his friends. And the people that fail, the people that fall victim, are the ones who sort of lose track of those relationships and those big picture goals when they get too sucked into the narrative.
Hmm. That's really good. So I think we could summarize the whole thing by just looking at both edges of the spectrum, right? We
Yeah,
love to say that magnanimous leaders lead at the edges. And you could call it being pragmatic, you can call it a number of different things, but you can see the big picture, which that's kind of the positive parts of Sauron, is he's able to see the big picture, look at the big levers that we have access to. And then for us, we want to stay close to the light, not like Sauron. When we do that, that's a really big picture thing to constantly. And then that also plays, even the staying close to the light plays at the minutia level, which is
Yeah.
know the reality, know what's actually going on. Don't allow yourself to be fooled.
Right. Yeah. And that's the both easy and hard to do, right?
It's painful. I mean, there's a reason I can't do it 100% of the time, because it's painful to
Right.
constantly look at reality. It requires accepting feedback. It requires giving feedback that is not going to necessarily uh,
Yeah.
immediately give you gains in that relationship, but is long term going to build that person up, or long term going to build up your relationship or your goal. And Sauron's not willing to do that.
Right.
He's
He
not,
isn't.
right. Everything he does is so that that person can get an immediate gain. He's never working with Celebrimbor so that Celebrimbor can promote human flourishing.
Yeah. Sauron is missing the key magnanimous leader trait, right? It is all about him, right? He is at the end of the day, the only thing he really cares about is getting power for himself. And he's skillfully using these other things, even as much as he's enjoying them. He's skillfully using these other people and these other levers just to get where he wants to go. And so that's we keep coming back to that lesson. Weird.
Awesome, Brian. I feel like this was an incredible cap off to our villain series. I hope that others are able to get something out of it, because I know I'm taking a lot away from it. Talk to me about what our next series is going to be and what movie we'll be doing next week.
All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. I think we've examined our villain counterexamples and seen ways that they succeed and fail, and saw some great ideas about how you could or couldn't be, wouldn't want to be like Hans Gruber or Sauron. So we're going to shift gears now to some more practical stuff. We're calling the series "Trust the Process." We're going to talk about playbooks that you can use as a leader to help grow an organization, to help grow yourself, to help grow people that you're mentoring, what kind of leaders you should look for, what a good process looks like at not just an individual level, but an organizational level. So there's a lot of fun ways to do this. There'll be some sports analogies in there, but I think we got to start with a martial arts theme because, I mean, come on, right? So what are we doing, Drew? What's our first one?
We're starting off with going back to an animated movie, Kung Fu Panda. We had to get kind of the modern day Karate Kid here. Enjoy that, like you said, building up skill from the ground level.
This is going to be ridiculously fun. I'm looking forward to it. So join us next time. Trust the process. Kung Fu Panda. Lead wisely by WonderTour. Thank you for joining us. Just remember, until then, as always, character is destiny.